The tactical briefing room aboard the VSS Dominant Fang smelled like ionized metal and overconfidence. Commander Rick's tail stood at the head of the chamber, all 7 feet of scaled muscle and military pride, watching his elite strike team settle into their seats. These weren't just any soldiers, these were the Korthian Empire's finest. The ones who'd breached the sulfuric gates of Telos 9. The ones who'd survived the screaming warrens of Kelthax Prime. The ones who apparently were about to get their tails handed to them by a single unarmed mammal, but Rick still didn't know that yet. Oh no. Right now, he was busy being impressively deluded about how this operation was going to go. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating through the room like gravel in a blender. And I use that term loosely because half of you don't even have genders in the traditional sense. We stand on the precipice of glory. Private Kalesmon, a 4-armed Vrelian whose species had evolved on a planet with gravity 3 times Earth standard, raised one of his many appendages. "Sir, with all due respect, we're sitting, not standing." Vrixtal's eye stalks swiveled in a way that suggested Kalesmon should probably shut his intake valve. "It's called a metaphor, Private. Perhaps if you spent less time in the weight compression chamber and more time reading tactical literature, you'd recognize one. Sergeant Thum, a gelatinous Coularian who could survive in hard vacuum and thought carbon-based lifeforms were adorably fragile, gurgled something that might have been agreement. Then again, it might have been indigestion. With Coularians, you never really knew. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a detailed schematic of Research Station Gamma 17. The station hung in the display like a metallic spider, all jutting arms and sensor arrays, orbiting a moon that nobody cared about in a system that barely warranted a designation. "This," Vrexatal continued, gesturing with one clawed hand, "is our target. Intelligence reports indicate that the humans have been conducting weapons research here. Experimental technology, possibly dangerous, definitely classified. Our mission is simple. We infiltrate. We secure the data. We eliminate any resistance. We extract. Clean. Efficient. Exactly the kind of operation the Korthian Elite Strike Force was designed for." Lieutenant Vexera, the team's demolitions expert and a member of a species that communicated partially through bioluminescent color shifts, flickered from confident blue to skeptical purple. "Sir, forgive my questioning, but haven't we been told that human facilities are notoriously difficult to breach? Something about their paranoid security protocols and tendency to booby-trap everything." Vixtal's mandibles clicked in what passed for a dismissive laugh among his people. "Propaganda. Human psychological warfare. They want us to believe they're more dangerous than they actually are. The reality? They're a species barely 200 cycles into space travel. They're slow. They need artificial environments to survive in conditions we find mildly uncomfortable. They're about as threatening as a Teluvian pudding beast, and those things literally dissolve when you look at them wrong." Somewhere in the back of the room, Corporal Jixther, who'd actually fought against humans during the border skirmishes of the Telos sector, shifted uncomfortably. His exoskeleton made a small clicking sound that nobody paid attention to. He'd learned not to share his opinions about humans after the last briefing, when he'd suggested that maybe, just maybe, the species that had gone from wooden ships to fusion drives in less than 300 planetary rotations might be worth taking seriously. His squadmates had laughed at him for a week. "Now," Vextal continued, zooming in on a specific section of the station, "the primary research laboratory is here, in Section 7 Alpha. According to our intelligence, which is absolutely flawless because when has military intelligence ever been wrong, there are approximately 12 human researchers currently on station. No military presence, no combat personnel, just scientists, soft, squishy, absolutely terrified scientists who will probably surrender the moment they see us." The hologram shifted to show the infiltration route. It looked complicated. Multiple airlocks, redundant security systems, backup power grids. The kind of setup that suggested someone had put a lot of thought into keeping unwanted visitors. "We'll breach through the docking port here," Vrextal indicated a point on the station's outer hull. "Sergeant Thum will neutralize the airlock controls. Private Kelsman, you'll handle the blast door if needed. Lieutenant Vexor, you're on overwatch. Everyone else, standard breach and clear protocol." Question. Jexthar raised one of his primary manipulation appendages. "Sir, what about the possibility of human reinforcements? Their distress signals can reach nearby patrol ships in under 4 minutes if there won't be time for reinforcements." Vrextal cut him off. "We'll be in and out in 15 minutes. The humans won't even know what happened until we're already back on the ship counting our commendations." "Oh, the irony. If future Rixtil could have traveled back in time to slap present Rixtil across his smug face, he absolutely would have. The approach to Research Station Gamma 17 went exactly according to plan, which should have been the first warning sign that everything was about to go spectacularly wrong. The universe has a funny way of setting you up like that. Everything's smooth, everything's perfect, you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner after the mission, and then reality decides to introduce you to its friend called consequences. The dominant Fang slid into position, using the moon's magnetic field to mask their approach. The station's sensors, such as they were, didn't even twitch. The docking port loomed ahead. All human angles and human engineering, which meant it looked vaguely rectangular and had warning labels in at least 7 languages. "Docking clamps engage," reported the pilot, a thin Krellian who'd flown atmospheric craft through ion storms, and could thread a battlecruiser through an asteroid field blindfolded. "Airlock seal is solid." "You're good to go, Commander." Rixtal stood, his combat armor gleaming under the ship's harsh lighting. The rest of the team followed suit, checking weapons, adjusting equipment, doing all those last-minute things soldiers do when they're about to walk into a situation that they really truly don't understand. Thum oozed forward, extending a pseudopod toward the airlock control panel. Q-Luriers were excellent hackers, mostly because they could literally flow into electronic systems and reconfigure them from the inside. It was deeply unsettling to watch, which is probably why Thum enjoyed it so much. 3 seconds later, the airlock hissed open. "Too easy," Kalesman muttered, hefting his plasma rifle. With 4 arms, he could carry enough firepower to level a small building. "Way too easy." "That's because humans are easy," Rixtal replied, stepping through the airlock. "Now stop complaining and stay focused." The interior of Research Station Gamma 17 was, in a word, bland. Gray walls, standard lighting, everything labeled in that efficient, slightly annoying way that humans seem to love. "Emergency exit section 7 Alpha. Athorticide personnel only. Warlorring experimental systems in operation." That last one should have given them pause. It did not. They moved through the corridors in standard tactical formation, weapons up, sensors active, looking for all the world like professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. The station was quiet, too quiet, some might say, if they were the kind of person who paid attention to horror movie tropes. "Where is everyone?" Vexer asked, her bioluminescence shifting to concerned orange. "Probably hiding," Vrixurel replied. "Or evacuated, or in a panic room somewhere writing their memoirs about the day the scary aliens came to visit." They reached the main laboratory door. It was sealed, naturally, with a security lock that looked moderately sophisticated by human standards, which meant it was approximately as challenging as a child's toy by Korthian standards. Thum oozed forward again, interfacing with the control panel. This took slightly longer. 5 seconds instead of 3. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the laboratory beyond. And that's when things got weird. The laboratory was pristine. Workstations arranged in neat rows, equipment humming quietly, holographic displays showing data streams that scrolled past in languages most of the team didn't recognize. But no people, no scientist frantically destroying evidence, no security personnel making last stands, just emptiness. And in the center of the room, sitting on a completely ordinary desk, was a coffee mug, still steaming. Jexthar's combat instincts, honed by actual experience fighting humans instead of just reading reports written by people who'd never met one, started screaming at him. "Sir, I don't like this. That beverage is still producing thermal vapors. Someone was here very recently, someone who left in a hurry but not in a panic, because they took the time to leave their drink in a visible location, which suggests they're sloppier than we thought," Rixental interrupted. "Fan out. Secure the data terminals. Let's get what we came for and leave." The team spread out across the laboratory, each member moving to their assigned position. Thum interfaced with the primary computer system. Vexeter set up a portable sensor array to watch the door. Kalesman took up a defensive position that would let him lay down covering fire across the entire room if needed. Everything was going fine, which meant everything was about to go tremendously not fine. The lights went out, not gradually, not with any warning. One moment, standard illumination. Next moment, absolute darkness. "Emergency lighting should activate in 3, 2. Rixtal began. It didn't. "Thum, what's happening?" Vextol demanded, his voice taking on an edge that suggested his confidence might be developing some cracks. "The entire power grid just rerouted," Thum burbled. his gelatinous form glowing faintly with its own bioluminescence. Not offline. Rerouted. All station power is now flowing to Section 4 Delta, which according to this schematic is, there was a pause that felt approximately 3 hours long, which is the experimental containment wing. Containment for what? Vexeter asked, her colors cycling rapidly through the entire spectrum of oh no, before anyone could answer. The door at the far end of the laboratory opened. What the door they'd come through? A different door. One that apparently led deeper into the station. And from that door came the sound of footsteps, not running, not stomping, not the frantic scramble of someone fleeing or the purposeful march of combat boots, just walking, casual, unhurried. The kind of walking you do when you're heading to the kitchen to make a sandwich and you're not particularly concerned about anything because why would you be, you're just making a sandwich. The footsteps got closer. The emergency lighting finally decided to make an appearance, bathing the laboratory in dim red illumination that made everything look vaguely ominous. And into the laboratory walked a human, not a squad of humans, not a security team, not a heavily armed response unit, one human. She looked to be in her mid-30s by human standards, which meant absolutely nothing to the Corthian strike team because they had no frame of reference for human aging. She was wearing what appeared to be civilian clothes. A shirt that had some kind of faded graphic on it that might have been a band logo or possibly a picture of a cat. No armor, no visible weapons. Her hair was pulled back in a messy arrangement that suggested she'd been working and hadn't bothered with proper grooming protocols. She was holding another coffee mug. She took a sip. She looked at the elite strike team currently pointing enough weapons at her to vaporize a small city. She raised one eyebrow. Huh, she said, her voice carrying that particular accent that Jigsaw recognized as North American regional dialect. That was faster than the betting pool predicted. Miller owes me $20. Fitzstall stared at her. His tactical training. His years of military experience, his entire worldview of how combat situations were supposed to unfold, all of it came to a screeching halt as his brain tried to process what was happening. You, he began, his translator struggling slightly with the sheer confusion in his voice. You're not afraid. The human took another sip of coffee. Afraid? Of what? You guys? Please. I've seen scarier things in the break room microwave. She walked past Kelsman, who was so confused he forgot to track her with his weapon, and set her mug down on one of the workstations. Although I gotta say your entry was pretty good. Nice formation, good spacing. You clearly train together regularly. 7 out of 10. Would recommend. This is a military operation, Frexstar managed, trying to regain some sense of control over the situation. You're a prisoner, am I? The human looked genuinely curious. That's interesting. See, from where I'm standing here about 60 meters inside a research station that's been studying exotic energy interactions for the last 18 months. And you triggered our sensors about 4 minutes ago, and you know what happens when you trigger our sensor. Nobody answered. Come on, she said, looking disappointed. Anybody? No? Fine, I'll tell you. When you trigger our sensors, the station's automated systems interpret that as a potential containment breach scenario and redirect all available power to the experimental stabilization field in Section 4 Delta, which is where we've been doing some really interesting work with quantum fold dynamics. Doom gurgled something that sounded concerned. Quantum fold dynamics. But that's theoretically impossible. The energy requirements alone would require about 3 times the output of a standard research station reactor. The human finished. Yeah, that's why we built a non-standard reactor. Keep up. She pulled out a small device from her pocket. It looked like a communicator. Hey, Marcus? Yeah, it's Jamie. They're here. No, exactly like we thought. Elite strike team, lots of weapons, very intimidating. No, they haven't figured it out yet. Yes, I know, I'll give them another minute. She put the device away. Figured what out? Dexter asked, her colors now locked on terrified white. Jamie, because apparently that was her name, smiled. It was not a comforting smile, it was the smile of someone who knows something you don't, and what they know is probably going to ruin your whole day. You're standing in the laboratory where we've been studying how to fold space at the quantum level, she said, speaking slowly like she was explaining something to a particularly dim child. And when you breached our airlock, the station interpreted that as a potential threat to experimental stability. So it locked down all the exits, rerouted all the power, and activated the containment field. So, Vextel demanded. So, Jamie replied, that containment field, it's designed to keep things in, not out. And right now you're in. The lights flickered, Somewhere deep in the station, something that sounded like a combination between a thunderstorm and a very angry musical instrument began to hum. "Oh," Jamie added, checking her watch like she had somewhere else to be. "And in about 90 seconds the fold generator is going to complete its current cycle, which means everything inside the containment field is going to experience what we technically call a non-local spatial translation event." "In standard?" Jixthar asked, his voice very small. "You're going to teleport," Jamie said cheerfully. "To somewhere. We're not exactly sure where. That's kind of the whole point of the experiment. But don't worry, we'll retrieve you eventually. Probably. Maybe. Look, science is hard, okay?" Vrextel felt something he hadn't felt in his entire military career. Something that went beyond concern or tactical worry. He felt like an idiot. "Can you turn it off?" he asked. "Oh sure," Jamie said. "Absolutely, I've got the override codes right here." She patted her pocket. "But here's the thing. You guys came in here all aggressive, pointing weapons, being generally threatening. And I'm thinking, you know what, maybe you need a little time to think about your life choices. Consider this a learning experience." The humming got louder. "Please?" Kelsman asked, all four of his arms lowering his weapon in a gesture of surrender. Jamie appeared to consider this. She looked at each member of the strike team in turn. Then she looked at her coffee mug, still sitting on the desk where she'd left it. "Tell you what," she said. "I'll turn off the containment field. But first you're going to answer some questions for me." "Deal?" "Anything," Brixtel said immediately, his pride having completely evacuated the premises. "Great." Jamie pulled out a small datapad. "First question. What kind of tactical planning leads a strike team to infiltrate an experimental research station without first checking what kind of experiments are being conducted?" 60 seconds had never felt so long. The humming had evolved from ominous background noise to the kind of sound that makes your internal organs vibrate in ways they definitely weren't designed to. Vrextel, who had personally led assaults on fortified bunkers and survived 3 different species' attempts to kill him with extreme prejudice, found himself experiencing an entirely new emotion, profound regret. "Well?" Jamie asked, tapping her datapad with one finger like she had all the time in the universe. Which technically she did. "The Corthian strike team? Not so much. I'm waiting for an answer. What tactical genius decided that checking the research manifest was optional?" "That would be command," Vrextel admitted, his vocal translator making his shame sound even more pathetic than it actually was. "They said the intelligence was solid." "Uh-huh." Jamie made a note on her pad. "And did this solid intelligence mention that we've been publicly broadcasting our research parameters for the last 6 months? Because, you know, that's kind of how science works. We publish papers, we share data, we literally have a website." Thum made a gurgling sound that suggested he was having some kind of existential crisis. "We could have just looked it up?" "Yep." Jamie took another sip from her coffee mug, which she'd somehow retrieved during the conversation without anyone noticing. "But that would have required basic research skills and a willingness to use Google, so I can see how that might be challenging for an elite military unit." The humming reached a pitch that made Jixthar's exoskeleton rattle. Somewhere in the bowels of the station, machinery that probably shouldn't exist was doing things that definitely violated several laws of physics. 45 seconds, Jamie announced cheerfully. "Next question. On a scale of 1 to catastrophically stupid, how would you rate your commander's decision to ignore the giant warning signs we posted literally everywhere? Please," Vexeter begged, her bioluminescence now cycling through colors that didn't even have names in standard. "Please just stop the machine." Jamie looked at her with something approaching sympathy. "You know what? Fine. You seem nicer than the rest of them." She pulled out her override device and punched in a code. "But only because I don't want to deal with the paperwork of interdimensional incident reports. Those things are murder." The humming began to decrease. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But enough that Kelsman's forearms stopped shaking quite so violently. "Thank the eternal void," Vrextel breathed. "Don't thank anything yet," Jamie said. "Because while I've stopped the fold generator, the station's still in lockdown mode. Which means you're still trapped in here with me. And I'm still annoyed that you interrupted my coffee break." The emergency lighting flickered and then, mercifully, the main lights came back on. The laboratory looked exactly the same as before. Pristine. Professional. Utterly non-threatening. Which somehow made the entire situation even more humiliating. "So," Jamie continued, hopping up to sit on one of the workstations with the casual ease of someone who absolutely owned this situation, "here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down. Right there." She pointed at the floor. and you're going to listen to a brief educational presentation about why invading human research facilities is a terrible idea. Then, if you're very lucky and very polite, I'll let you leave with most of your dignity intact. Vic still looked at his team. His elite, highly trained, utterly defeated team. They looked back at him with expressions that ranged from resignation to, "Please, sir, can we just do what the terrifying human says?" They sat down, all of them. Right there on the floor like students in a classroom. Jamie grinned. "Excellent. See? You can follow instructions. That's progress." She pulled up a holographic display with a casual gesture. "Right. Lesson 1. Humans and Experimental Technology. Let me tell you a little story about how we went from discovering fire to splitting atoms in about 10,000 years. For the next 20 minutes, the Corthian Empire's finest strike team received what could only be described as the most humiliating education of their military careers. Jamie walked them through the history of human technological development with the enthusiasm of a teacher and the snark of someone who was enjoying this way too much. "See, the thing about humans," she explained, pulling up a chart that showed exponential technological growth, "is that we're really, really good at two things: making mistakes and learning from them. Sometimes the learning happens quickly, sometimes it takes us a few thousand years and several nuclear near-misses, but we get there eventually." Jexthar, who had actually been paying attention during his intelligence briefings about humans, raised one appendage. "Excuse me, but didn't your species almost destroy itself multiple times during its industrial period?" "Oh, absolutely," Jamie agreed. "Several times. We came this close," she held up her fingers with a tiny gap between them, "to turning our planet into a radioactive wasteland at least twice. Maybe 3 times depending on how you count the Cuban Missile Crisis. But here's the thing, we did because when humans get scared enough, we occasionally, sometimes, maybe, use our brains for something other than figuring out new ways to blow each other up." She pulled up another display, this one showing the research station specifications. "This facility, we built it in 18 months. 18 months from initial design to full operation. You know why? Because 3 years ago we figured out that quantum fold technology might be possible. And you know what humans do when we figure out something might be possible? Build it before checking if it's safe." Kilsman suggested. "Well, yes, but also no," Jamie said. "We build it carefully, with redundancies, with safety systems, with about 17 different ways to shut everything down if things go wrong. Because we've learned from experience that experimental technology has a tendency to explode if you're not careful, and we're actually pretty fond of not exploding these days." The door at the far end of the laboratory opened again. This time, several more humans walked in. They were dressed similarly to Jamie, which is to say they looked like they'd gotten dressed in the dark and decided that fashion was someone else's problem. One of them, a tall man with gray hair and glasses, surveyed the scene with the expression of someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out before. "Jamie," he said, his voice carrying the patient exhaustion of a longtime supervisor, "did you trap another strike team in the containment field?" "Only for like 90 seconds, Marcus," Jamie replied. "And I gave them the safety lecture. They're practically experts now." Marcus looked at the seated Corthian soldiers. "Is this the 3rd or 4th team this year?" "4th, if you count the relic scouts. 3rd if you don't, because technically they were just reconnaissance. We need better warning signs. I've been saying that for months." Marcus sighed and turned his attention to Vrixtay. "Commander, I'm Dr. Marcus Webb, Station Director. On behalf of Humanity and Research Station Gamma 17, I'd like to apologize for the terror and confusion. We're aware that our security systems can be somewhat aggressive when provoked." "Somewhat?" Vexer squeaked, her colors finally settling back to something approaching normal. "We're working on it," Marcus said. "In the meantime, I need to ask you some questions. First, who sent you?" Vextol, who had by this point completely abandoned any pretense of military bearing, slumped where he sat. "Corthian Imperial Command. We were told this was a soft target. Minimal resistance. Standard data recovery operation." Marcus nodded like this explained everything. "Let me guess. Your intelligence came from surveillance data gathered from long-range sensors?" "Yes. And those sensors showed a small research station with minimal personnel and no obvious military presence?" "That is correct." Marcus exchanged a look with Jamie. "Did anyone tell them about the stealth garrison on the moon?" The color drained from Vrixtal's face. "Well, not literally, because his species didn't work that way, but the emotional equivalent happened in real time." "The what?" he managed. "The stealth garrison," Marcus repeated. "On the moon. The one your ship is currently orbiting." The one with about 200 human Marines who've been watching you on sensors since you arrived, and have been taking bets on how long you'd last inside the station. Jamie pulled up another display. It showed the dominant Fang, sitting in what the Corthians had thought was a concealed position, absolutely lit up by targeting systems from at least 6 different weapon platforms. Smile, Jamie said. You're on candid camera. Doom made a sound like water going down a very surprised drain. We were compromised from the start? From before the start, Marcus corrected. We knew you were coming 3 days ago. We intercepted your mission briefing. Your communications security is, and I mean this with respect, absolutely terrible. Somewhere on the dominant Fang, the ship's communications officer was about to have a very bad performance review. So this was all. Rextel struggled to find the words. You let us walk into a trap. Trap is such an aggressive word, Jamie said. I prefer controlled learning experience. You came here expecting to push around some helpless scientists. Instead, you discovered that human scientists work in facilities that double as very patient mousetraps. Lesson learned, nobody got hurt. Everybody goes home smarter than they arrived. We could have died, Kelsmon pointed out. But you didn't, Jamie countered. See? Safety systems. They work. Marcus cleared his throat. Commander Rextel, here's what's going to happen. You and your team are going to stand up, walk back to your ship and return to whoever sent you. You're going to file a report explaining that Research Station Gamma 17 is significantly more dangerous than your intelligence suggested. You're going to recommend that future operations against human facilities include actual research into what those facilities do before sending in strike teams. And in exchange, we're not going to tell anyone that the legendary Corthian elite strike force got lectured about basic safety protocols by a physicist drinking coffee. You're letting us go? Brixtall asked, not quite believing it. Of course we're letting you go, Marcus said. What else would we do? Start a war over a failed espionage attempt? That would be stupid. Wars are expensive. They're messy. They're bad for research budgets. Much better to send you home embarrassed but educated. Jamie hopped down from her workstation. Plus, and I cannot stress this enough, the paperwork for capturing enemy combatants is absolutely soul-crushing. I've got experiments to run. Marcus has grant proposals to write. We don't have time to process prisoners of war. However, Marcus added, his voice taking on a harder edge. This is a one-time courtesy. The next team that tries this, we let the Marines handle it. And Marines are significantly less patient than scientists. Clear. Rixtall stood, his legs feeling like they were made of something significantly less stable than bone and muscle. Crystal clear, Dr. Webb. Excellent. Marcus gestured toward the door they'd entered through. Jamie, please escort our guests back to their vessel. Try not to scare them any more than absolutely necessary. I make no promises, Jamie said cheerfully. Come on, guys. Field trip time. The walk back through Research Station Gamma 17 was possibly the longest walk of Rixtall's life. Jamie kept up a running commentary the entire way, pointing out various features of the station with the enthusiasm of a tour guide and the subtle menace of someone who knew exactly how much power they held. And this is Section 3, she said, gesturing at a sealed door, where we're working on controlled singularity generation. Don't worry, the containment is solid. Mostly. There was that incident last month, but we fixed the problem. Probably. Kelsmon whimpered. Oh, and over here? Jamie pointed at another door. Exotic matter research. Turns out you can make stuff with negative mass if you're creative enough and don't mind the occasional violation of thermodynamics. It's great. Sometimes things fall up instead of down. Keeps life interesting. They passed a window that looked out onto the moon's surface. In the distance, previously invisible structures were now clearly outlined by running lights that someone had helpfully turned on. Weapon emplacements, sensor arrays. What looked suspiciously like a railgun the size of a small building. Nice view, right? Jamie asked. We had landscape architects design the garrison placement. Wanted it to be aesthetically pleasing while still maintaining optimal firing solutions. Art and war. Together at last, finally. Mercifully, they reached the airlock where the dominant Fang was docked. The ship sat there looking exactly as they'd left it, except now everyone aboard knew it was surrounded by enough firepower to reduce it to its component atoms. Jamie stopped at the airlock door. All right, team. This is where we part ways. I'd say it's been fun, but let's be honest. It was mainly fun for me. You guys looked like you were having a pretty terrible time. We were, Jixthar confirmed. Good. That means you learned something. Jamie pulled out a data chip and handed it to Rextel. This contains the actual research manifest for this station. Everything we're working on. All publicly available information. You know, the stuff you could have looked up before coming here. Consider it a parting gift. Maybe read it on the flight home. Might prevent future incidents. Brixital took the chip like it was a live grenade. Thank you. You're welcome. Oh, and one more thing. Jamie's expression turned serious. Tell your commanders that humans don't build soft targets. We build targets that look soft until you poke them. Then they poke back. Hard. We've been doing it since before we left our home planet. It's kind of our thing. I will relay that message. Brixel promised. Great. Now get out of here before Marcus changes his mind about the whole prisoner of war thing. He's been cranky ever since the funding committee cut our coffee budget. The strike team filed through the airlock with the enthusiasm of students fleeing a pop quiz. As Rickstall was about to step through, Jamie called out one last time. Hey, Commander. He turned. For what it's worth, your tactical approach wasn't bad. You just had terrible intelligence and picked the wrong target. Maybe next time aim for something that isn't actively trying to fold space inside itself. Just a suggestion. Rickstall nodded, stepped through the airlock, and heard it seal behind him with a hiss that sounded distinctly like laughter. On the bridge of the dominant Fang, the pilot looked up as Rickstall entered. Sir, mission status. Abort, Rickstall said flatly. Undock immediately. Maximum safe speed. Do not engage any contacts. Do not respond to any hails. Just get us out of this system. But sir, the mission parameters are void. The humans knew we were coming. They've been watching us the entire time. They have a military garrison on the moon that we completely missed. And they have weapons that violate physics in ways I don't want to think about. We're leaving. Now, the pilot wisely stopped asking questions and started the undocking sequence. As the dominant Fang pulled away from Research Station Gamma 17, Rickstall stood at the observation port and watched the station recede into the distance. Inside that collection of metal and experimental technology, scientists were probably already back to work. Running experiments, drinking coffee, occasionally folding space because apparently that was just a thing humans did now. Jigsaw approached quietly. Sir, what are you going to tell command? Ritsital thought about that for a long moment. The truth. That we underestimated the humans. That their research facilities are far more dangerous than intelligence suggested. That any species that goes from discovering fire to weaponizing quantum mechanics in 10,000 years should probably be approached with significantly more caution. They're going to blame you for the failure, probably. Rickstall pulled out the data chip Jamie had given him. But I'm also going to recommend that before we target any more human facilities, we actually read about what they're doing. Novel concept, I know. Research before raiding. It's so crazy it might actually work. In the laboratory, Jamie was already back at her workstation, coffee in hand, running calculations for the next experimental cycle. Marcus walked over, shaking his head. You enjoyed that way too much, he said. I really did, Jamie agreed. You think they'll actually read the research manifest? Maybe. Probably not. Military types tend to prefer the kinetic solution approach. Marcus pulled up a status display. How long until the garrison stands down? Colonel Martinez says they'll maintain alert status for another 6 hours, then return to normal readiness. Apparently the Marines enjoyed the exercise. Said it was the most entertainment they'd had all month.
Wonderful.
Glad we could provide enrichment activities for the troops. Marcus sipped his own coffee, which had gone cold sometime during the excitement. Think this will stop future attempts? Jamie laughed. Not a chance. Someone else will think they can do better. Better planning, better intel, better tactics. And they'll come here expecting a soft target. And we'll educate them too. That's the plan. Besides, it's good practice for the security systems. Can't just rely on simulations. Need real-world testing. Marcus raised his mug in a mock toast. To humans, making friends through superior firepower and aggressive education. Jamie clinked her mug against his. And coffee. Don't forget the coffee. Never forget the coffee. Somewhere in the depths of space, the dominant Fang accelerated toward the jump point that would take it home. In the ship's briefing room, Brixital was already composing his report. It was not going to be a pleasant document to write, or read, or present to his superiors, but it was going to be honest. And maybe, just maybe, it would save the next strike team from walking into a research station and discovering that humans had turned scientific inquiry into an art form that occasionally doubled as a very effective defense system. The coffee mug Jamie had left on the desk earlier sat exactly where she'd placed it. Still steaming. still full. A small sign next to it now read, "Reserved for future uninvited guests. Please drink responsibly." Research Station Gamma 17 returned to its normal operations. Experiments continued. Data was collected, papers were written, and in a corner of the main laboratory a new sign went up on the wall. "Days since last military incursion." Underneath in smaller print, "Previous record." Underneath that in even smaller print, "We're really hoping to break 30 someday." Science, as always, continued. Coffee was consumed. Space was occasionally folded. And if another strike team showed up next week thinking they could succeed where the Corthians had failed, well, Jamie had already started preparing her next educational presentation. She was thinking about adding visual aids this time. Maybe some interpretive dance. Really make it memorable. After all, if you're going to teach a lesson, you might as well teach it well. And humans, as the galaxy was slowly learning, were very good teachers, especially when properly caffeinated.